going to be looking. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be looking at the age 1 to 2, where some very important things happen. One of them, namely speech. Before we begin, would you all have a way to write some little reflections down? So a pen and a paper, or however you like to do that. We're going to begin with an exercise, a eurythmy exercise, that I hope will give us a little bit of an experience of what it's like for pre-verbal, when before we can speak, where are the forces coming from to allow us to speak? The exercise that we're going to be doing comes from this little booklet that was prepared for study material for the Anthroposophical Medicine Conference some time ago by Leah Vanderpals and Anne-Marie Bechelin. And the exercise is going to have some tone eurythmy and some speech. So some very basic elements. I'm going to hold up this picture here of just to give you a sense of what we're building up. We're going to begin with a tone. And you can think about just pure tones that come really from beyond the zodiac. So when we think of music of the spheres, it's coming from way in the cosmos towards us as gifts. The tone that we're going to be working with today is E, which is the third note in a scale, in the C major scale. So, or if you think do, re, mi, it would be me. And then from there, you'll hear the interval of a third. And maybe I could have Andrea already, would you just show E, first of all? And maybe we could pin both of us so that people can see Andrea and the picture here.
Adjustment of the screen.
Now, most of you are eurythmists, but not all. So we're going to just really show these basic elements. So the first thing that we'll see is the tone E. Would you just show what you'll be doing? So it's this angle, and you can think of yourself as being put into a kind of geometrical form, and that the tone will come towards you and you can touch it with your hands. Then you'll hear the interval of a third, and it will be moving. So rather than a still tone, there's going to be a movement. And especially you can see how Andrea's lower arm with the two bones, one that's on the inside, one's on the outside, and you're going to move through those. And there'll be some music, just two notes playing then. After that, we're going to step over a threshold. So really, you'll just be taking a step, and then we're going to move into, so from tones to the moving interval, which comes from the inside out, over into the sound of the vowel ah. So like the letter A, that would sound as ah. And from there to the consonant, which is R. And you'll be hearing me say it in this kind of German pronunciation, so it'll be sounding like er, er. And then we reverse the whole process. So you'll go from the R, er, er, back to the vowel sound, ah. Then you'll step back over the threshold into the world of intervals. That will be the third, your moving arms. And finally, back to the pure tone of E with this angle of your arms. Okay. That's all I want to say about it. I would really like everybody to just experience it without speaking too much more about it. But Andrea, I wonder if you might have something more you'd like to say.
Yeah, just for those who are not eurythmists, this the tone E is really sounding more. You it's almost like you touch it and you're touched by the tone by itself. You don't have to hold your arms tight there. You just let them sound there. Yeah, that's one thing. And then for the third, it's this. It's really something that moves you, and you follow that movement by this with this weaving gesture of the lower arms. So in that realm of your heart. Yeah. So that's all what I wanted to add. And we start with being in anticipation of a tone, and then listening to it, and then we move the tone. Yeah. And we will do the exercise twice, so that the first time you can really engage with it, following Raven's music also, and then we do it a second time to really go more into an inner experience when you are not so much occupied with the structure of the exercise. Yeah?
And so just to repeat it, we'll go from tone to interval, stepping over the threshold to vowel and consonant. Air, air, air. Air, air, ah. And we will repeat it. air, air, air. Air, air. Ah.
Thank you.
Now you can take a minute and just write down impressions, reflections. And we'd love to hear anything that you'd like to share any impressions or reflections. And it's such a small group. I think you can just unmute and go ahead and talk. Brigitte, the first note was an E. And then it was E and G sharp for the third.
Well, I'll say something. As a non-eurythmist, it's a realization that has just sort of gone click, which was reinforced today, that the reality of the movement and the tone and the sound is already there and in the periphery, and I'm reaching out to join it, which was so exciting and a very liberating realization.
Thank you.
I think it's a lovely process or experience to feel or whatever the movement from the outside coming inward and then from inside and coming back out again through the gesture.
Mhm.
As a non-eurythmist, what really I'm having a hard time coming up with words about the experience. So what came to me was just the phrase the tone spoke. So that's what came out because it wasn't an experience that lent itself to analyzing for me. Thank you.
Beautiful. I was kind of hoping that when you think about a 1-year-old first speaking, they're also not analyzing where it's coming from, but it is coming from somewhere. Of course, we will say more about it later, but it's just nice to have that experience. Right? Does anybody else want to share anything? Then I will turn it over to Anouk.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to resound what I just heard because it's just such a nice way to start this journey, what I want to take you on. So I heard the sounds are already there. We went from the outside coming in and then the inside coming out. And the tone spoke. Yeah, so we had this, so next to me, you see, oh, what side? This side? You see my slides, and this is actually the first slide I want to show you, where you see the larynx here. And then here you see the human being from the back. And when we want to talk about speech, we have to talk about the speech organ. And this speech organ, Steiner gives such an amazing image of that, is that it is as if the upper human being from the back, so if you would see my lower half of my head and part of my ears, and then the first part of my back, and then you have to imagine that metamorphosed. That's kind of what the larynx is, facing towards you. So it is as if you have a little other you, a human being, partially human being, speaking to you. I find that such an amazing image of this larynx. So I wanted to give you that picture to start with. And here, I think someone tried to really hold that as an you can almost see those same kind of muscle groups, and as if the larynx is also reaching out a little bit what we just did with eurythmy. It's kind of a eurythmist in us. Yeah. So I want to take that one and also the next slide to kind of help us with the experience. There's those three things: experience we just had, the slide I just showed you, and then this quote from Steiner. So he says this wonderful sentence: learning to speak rests entirely on a sort of imitation, whose foundations lie deep in human nature. So I want to take you deep into human nature, and so hold that image of learning to speak rest on a sort of imitation, entirely, he even says, on a sort of imitation. We kind of did it also with this sound coming, and then we were resounding with the eurythmic gestures. We were kind of imitating that. So now let's go to the first 3 years of childhood, where we start to see this speech come in. And I hope you'll see that it's a similar experience as we just did in Eurythmy. So if we go with from birth, what's the first thing they do? And they come from this watery realm, this watery world, take their first breath into the air. And then not much later, the scream comes after it, the cry with the out breath. So the larynx starts to really, in a way, it's our first tone, you could say, that comes out. And the little baby is mostly expressing with that crying bodily needs. And it isn't until the baby actually can hear herself, and I do hear because it is even children who cannot hear or deaf have that kind of experience, so they can hear or experience themselves by becoming quiet. Go they to the next phase, which is around 1 month. This lovely cooing. I mean, it's so delightful when a baby does that. You know, you just have this little bit of a social interaction, and it's almost like they're singing to you. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's so beautiful when they do that. And in a way, you could say they're not just only expressing their bodily needs, but it's a little bit of their inner mood. It's a little bit of their inner soul life, you could say. Then there's another stage, about 2 months, when they do this babbling. And babbling is basically saying things rhythmically. Ba ba da da ba ba la la. It's not real speech yet. And it is completely independent from hearing. They babble and not in a response to anything. And these first stages, the breathing, the screaming, the cooing, and the babbling, also children who are born deaf go through those stages. And also children, no matter what language they're born into, they go through these different stages. You wouldn't be really able, they've tried it though, however, to just see like, oh, a child in Europe or a child in Africa or in China sounds a little bit different when they coo or babble. But it's not really true. It's actually kind of a universal language, you could say. So they're in a very different world. And then they step, what we just did also, kind of over a threshold. Oh, sorry, I go, no, 2 at a time, that's fine. So with 4 months, they start to imitate sounds. So that's kind of this what Steiner talks about, this imitation. And it's a little bit of a meaningless imitation. They don't really, there's no consciousness so much. It's just making sounds they hear around it. It can even be mimicking the rain sounds. Or some, of course, is the speech around them. They are getting more connected to the genius of language, this being, it's actually an archangel, that is carrying each language. And Steiner gives this picture that at night, the child, or when they sleep, they actually are meeting this being of language from their own mother tongue, so to speak. Yeah, so they have this imitating of sounds. And then around 5 months, you start to see that there is a little bit of a connection, a cooperation between the hearing and the uttering of sounds. So it has a little bit more of a connection between the two. Then around 7 months, I find this very interesting because it also shows you're in a different realm here. They start to imitate sounds in a whisper. Very soft. And children are even seen like as if they are lip reading. So what is so special about whispering? So if I talk very softly at you right now, you don't really hear the dancing sounds. So what I'm trying to say, like when I'm bringing more force to my voice and go harder and louder, or a little less and less and less, what you hear is this breathing quality, more breath or less breath. When I just really write the vowel, so to speak, and I go, Mom, what were you? Wow? I express a little bit more of my soul. But when I whisper, it's just pure language. So I have to really use the top part of my mouth, to really form. And children, they don't really know yet what they're saying, but you see them whispering. And I had such a lovely moment this week. I have actually a child in my little group who is 7 months old, and she was just pulling herself up, and we noticed she was whispering. I couldn't believe it, like this really soft. It was not a word, of course, but this soft way of almost discovering, hey, I can use my way of expression in a different way. Have you ever caught a child? I was just so delighted that it was actually happening. Yeah. Well, then they go to another stage. And this is really first year. Now they're in uprightness. We talked about it last time. Very different orientation to the earth. When that happens, the larynx starts dropping too. So you have to be away, more in levity, for the larynx to drop. It's often when the teeth are more in there, and then they can really start to pronounce and use the oral cavity to just use speech. So that all comes together. And Steiner gives this points towards the fact that the child at the end of first year will develop the sense of language, this sense that we haven't discovered yet really, because it's invisible, but it's different than just listening and hearing sounds. Is that you recognize it's a language, and it's not till they have that sense that they can again step over the threshold and speaking. So you have to first need the sense organ to stand under language, understanding language, and then you can start to speak. And I have in here some sentences from Karl Koenig that I find really beautiful to kind of capture the different stages of speech, what really happens in the first to the second year, what we would call speaking. But I want you to kind of see that there is something happening before that. So they start speaking words. And these are often words that are reflecting more what lives inside of them. So it is, what would be a good word? Mama, of course. And often it means, I want mama. It's like a whole sentence in a word. The next stage would be that they start to name objects outside of them. And I will go more over this a little later, but I want you to have it here as some stages. Then they start to use simple sentences around age of 2. That's also when the sense of thought comes in. And it takes another whole full year almost for them to reach a simple conversation. So the 3 sentences, which I will come back to, that Karl Koenig gives to that, is I speak speech, for speaking words or just saying things. I'm just saying comes often from our inner life, often from our blood, so to speak. I'm just saying, yeah, you know what I mean? That kind of talk. Of course, they don't say that, but I'm talking about adults, to naming objects, which is more speech expresses itself in speaking, to a real conversation where you start to really talk back and forth with questions and answers, which Karl Koenig gives the sentence, speech expresses me in speaking. Okay, let's have this rest for now. Because we have this interesting line again from Steiner that learning to speak rests entirely on a sort of imitation, whose foundations lie deep in human nature. So I want to take you a little bit into the deep human nature of the body, especially the organs that have to do with speech, the hearing and the larynx. Okay, so let's do that. So here you have an image of course, the outer ears, the ear canal, and then here this middle ear. This is connected to the eustachian tubes and your larynx and the lungs. And then really what you really hear with the sense organ, in particular this snail-like structure here, what is the inner ear. What I find very fascinating is that this true inner ear, but it's also the balancing organ, lives all the way deep in the darkness, in the most dead part of our skull. You could say there's very hard bone, where there's hardly any blood anymore, completely separated out. So here we really go from one realm to another realm. And in that there is a little bit of a riddle of this ear. Because why so much trouble? Why not have the sense organs, like the little sensory cells right here on the eardrum, which would be here, which actually insects have that way. They have it sits right there. No, in human beings and mammals and higher animals, reptiles, it all goes a step further. It is the only organ sense organ that does that. You know, think of your eye. The retina is right where it meets the light. It's not suddenly going to a whole different space and then hasn't been transformed all the time. So we will look into that. That's a little bit of a riddle and a pointer, I think, about what speech is about. Okay, since I love embryology, we go there. I think embryology shows so much of those formative forces. So here we have a very young 24-day embryo, and here about 26 days, so not like only 2 days difference. And you see here the heart, here the first arm coming out. I talked about it last time, it's just a hand. And then here those arches, those little folds in the skin, which will form the whole face, the ears, especially the outer ear and the larynx. The inner ear, however, you see where that is? It's all the way in the back, comes from the back side in the neck. Well, this outer ear and middle ear come from here. So you have in this ear that the inner ear and the outer ear start growing towards each other from the back and the front, very different from those eyes that we did last time that grow this direction and then they go forward. Now, if you now look at the larynx is formed here in this last little arch. Do you notice how it's resting on the heart? There's actually some heart tissue and tissue of the larynx that are coming from the same kind of origin. So when we say we speak from the heart, that's actually in a way literally true. So there's this lovely connection there. Now let's focus on the outer ear. So what do we see when we think of imitation? Huh? We talked about that. So this outer ear, again, formed first here out of like 6 little, I almost see it as like a balls of clay, slowly forming, opening, and making this beautiful sculpture that is actually perfect for catching, so to speak, the sound. It's kind of mimicking in three-dimensional sculpture what the sound is doing. So I kind of thought maybe I can say sound as a sculptor, kind of as an imitative process. Now let's now look what happens in the middle ear. So that's this area here. So here we have the eardrum. Then we have 3 little bones. I will just show another one that you can see a little bit better. 3 little bones here. 1, 2, 3. They are connected and also have joints. So these are also known as the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. So again, when they're hearing sounds kind of come in through the outer ear, now starts moving this eardrum, which moves this bone, this bone, this bone, and then starts moving another membrane which is connected to this hole, but is deep in the cavern, so to speak, this inner snail-like inner ear. So let's look at embryology again. So where do those inner 3 little bones, the tiniest bones we have in a way, where do they come from? I think it's, again, such an interesting image here. So they come from those arches I just spoke, and then you see those 2 first ones, the hammer and the anvil, they come from this cartilage, which is actually connected to the jaw. It's kind of a precursor of our jaw that's later formed. And when this, what is left there in the end becomes this part in between my lower jaw and my upper jaw, part of it, and but most of the part becomes bones in the inner ear. You should maybe think, oh, so what? But I think this is good news because it gives us a little bit of a clue about what this might be. Because you might be familiar that Steiner gives this image that you can see those 3 little bones as a limb or an arm, kind of, and this would be the eardrum, kind of feeling, sensing the eardrum. And here, what we just saw, that it has a connection to these little limbs here, the chewing limbs, you could say. And then also here as in reptiles. So this is very interesting that in reptiles, they have an eardrum, not so much an outer ear. And this eardrum does not have those 2 bones that come from the jaw inside. So they don't have the hammer and the anvil. They do have the little stirrup in there. And they have something else attached to this eardrum, which is attached to the shoulder and here to their front leg. So what's happening when they hear with their front legs vibrations, very low vibrations that are traveling through the earth is a very good conductor, and they start moving like that. It moves, very much like those little 2 bones inside your ear. Start pulling here on the eardrum, and that's how they hear those low sounds. It is as if what we have internally, those 2 bones, it's a little hand, they have that outside. Do you see what I mean? And of course, they can also hear directly airborne sound as well. So here we have sound as a mover of limbs. It's almost like it makes you dance. So there's another imitation, you see? Here you can see so beautiful. It's actually doing it with the real limbs. And actually, by the way, that's how elephants also hear the really low vibration that they can make. They hear with their feet as well. So some animals still can do it. And I think if you've ever been in an area with really low bass going on, like music, you can also feel that even in your whole body going like that. Yeah. Okay, now let's go to this inner ear. How is it imitated there, the sound? Well, embryology again gives a beautiful image here. That when the arms grow outwards, or remember maybe from last time, it's kind of, yeah, both outwards and inwards. Last time you saw the eyes are also kind of following that same gesture out. The inner ear goes the opposite. It grows inwards at the same kind of time that the arms are kind of growing this direction. The ear goes in. Interesting connection again. And the limb, front arm, going inwards. Yeah. Now here's some pictures of how then this inner ear starts to really twist and form in a spiraling way till it becomes this double organ. The top being the sense of balance, which gives us spatial orientation. Super important in the first year to stand upright. And then the sense of hearing down here, which again is more like a snail house. And if you would cut it open a certain way, you can see it is in there, basically a spiraled long, if you would have a long string and you spiral it up like that, it's all continuous in there. If you cut it open the other way, it would look something like this. So what I said before, with going really in this inner ear, we're crossing a threshold from air to fluid. Because this snail house is filled with two kinds of fluids. One that is going here on the outside, where it's white, and a different kind of fluid, where it's here red. Okay, now, so we have sound coming in. First of the sound cut here, sound as a sculptor, sound as a mover of limbs. Now, it starts to push the liquid. But since the liquid cannot go anywhere, it will start forming a wave all the way through and coming back here, so you can see it. So for instance, here would be a high-pitched sound. So moving, 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 it will cause a wave, which will actually break at a certain moment, because it's a very short wave. It breaks here, like how waves break on the shoreline, and it pushes down this middle realm, and then the fluid goes back and bulges out here another kind of membrane. Okay, let's look a little deeper to get more of this riddle. So here, just to orient you, imagine we are kind of in the snail house, like a snail. So this would be all this hard bone around us. And if we would open the bone a little bit, we would look into the middle ear. And then here you would see the eardrum connected to the outer ear. Can you orient yourself a little bit? Yeah. Okay, so vibration, those three little bones start kind of vibrating, start pushing this liquid in here. This liquid has a slanted membrane there as a bottom. And then under it is this other fluid that I told you about. This has a different chemistry. And so here we see a lot of things happening. You go from air to fluid, from light to darkness, from the seen to the unseen, and from space to time. What do I mean with that? From space to time. Well, while I'm talking right now, you hear all these different sounds going one after the other. Each of them create a different kind of wave with different kind of wavelengths. And they are like, you would write a score of music. They would all kind of break a different part. So it's as if you would just have them all in time laid out. And then somehow we experience it as a wholeness, which is actually not happening in the brain, because in the brain it also goes to all different parts of the brain. This is again the riddle of how do we even experience sound. And then here this where this part is in, this water, also has a membrane at the bottom which starts to vibrate. So let's zoom out a little bit. So again, this membrane here is like a string from a strings instrument. While this water is moving, it moves this fluid in here, and this membrane is like a long string that's all kind of curled up into this inner ear. And if you would roll it all out, it would be literally like something like a string instrument like this, where you can actually play, if it was an instrument, in this kind of resounding in different ways. And what is so amazing about this one string, what's always set out, that by the beginning, so very close to the middle ear, it is very stiff and narrow, like a high string on an instrument. And when it goes toward the base, it is more wide and less stiff. So it's a very special kind of string that with this instrument, which is a Vietnamese one-stringed instrument, you kind of have to pull this lever to kind of get that effect, put more stiffness. But here we have this long membrane like that. So I hope it gives you a little bit of this an imagination of this inner ear. And then there is so much going on here, because the real sense organs are actually here, where it's kind of bluish. So what happens is when this starts vibrating, resonating with the right pitch, it kind of moves this upper layer here, which is almost like a windshield wiper that kind of starts to go with it, which pushes down the little hair cells here, super tiny cells that have hair-like structures, which then bend, and that will send a signal to the brain. What is fascinating that here are a whole row of hair cells too, and they actually are more like, they're not really muscles, but they actually have nerves that go in this direction, and they can move. So they can make this movement of this overlying membrane either larger or smaller. So they can amplify the sound or make it less loud, but it's super loud. So you can even hear. So there's an activity in the ear. Yeah. I see a little bit what we did in the eurythmy before, that there is something coming from me. Active listening somehow. Okay. So here we have sound as a strings player, or I say string player, because it's basically one player. So we go from sculpture to movement to playing an instrument. Quite an image, I think. Or from space to time. Truly crossing a threshold. So you could also say you go through the etheric here. It again gives us a little bit of an clue of this riddle, of this very complicated mechanism of having it separated, the sense organs. The sense organ, like so deep inside, it's hearing almost another world. So how do we experience music? So if this would be this inner string in our ear with all different notes, how do we experience? And Steiner gives this little hint. The respiratory rhythm in its extension into this organ of hearing encounters what is accomplished by the ear and the nervous system. Huh? Okay, let's read it again. The respiratory rhythm in its extension into this organ of hearing encounters what is accomplished by the ear and the nervous system. So I'm going to take a tiny little break for you here to contemplate or write down some notes or just digest for a moment what we have been doing so far. And if you feel inspired to share something, or you can also write something in the chat if you like, just a little nugget, or you can also come off, well, unmute yourself and just speak into this space. Maybe something that resonated or something that's living.
When you were talking about the ear is developing inward while the limbs are coming outward. And I was thinking about that and the frog, how it doesn't have what we have inside the ear, but it's like the limbs, its limbs. And then I was thinking about eurythmy, like that we're really, with our arms, with, with some of the eurythmy, it's showing the invisible limbs that are our ears, that are like the frog's limbs. I don't know if that made sense. But...
Totally, we're speaking back. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
for me, it stood out the amazing capacity to listen and what that actually entails. And I cannot really put my finger on it. It's almost like all of these tiny anatomical structures are there, like organs of perception, and at the same time they are super active. So for me, there's something that blends together in activity and stillness at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I love that. Well, if you think about it, this limb-like quality and this moving, it is right there. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Feel free to also send little things in the it can even be a word, in the chat if you want to.
Well,
Not
I'm
much.
struck by how differentiated sound is. And
Mm,
yet these tiny little hairs and these little moving, almost tiny little cells can create, and this fluid can create such a phenomenal amount of differentiation.
yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because if we die, the ear still works in a way. I mean, those waves are still happening. But what doesn't happen anymore is this little hair cells that are amplifying or de-amplifying. So there is no answer back. That actually dies. And there's some indications that speech, in the sense of words and very more subtle kind of way of tone, you could say. It's not really tone, but is that's what the little hairs respond to. Because how can you actually hear like a whisper?
So you think just after people die, they actually are still hearing?
Yeah, they actually do.
Hmm.
Especially musical hearing. Yeah. Again, it shows you a little bit that this ear is such a threshold organ. It's very special compared to all the others. And if you think about the 12 sense organs that Steiner gave, it is really on the threshold. The three above them that are developed in the first 3 years, like the sense of form or language, and the sense of the thought of the other, and the sense of the I, they are just right on the other side. And I love that you can see it in the embryology, you can see it in the anatomy. It's just like an open secret. It's right there. How Goethe calls this open secret. If we are listening into, it will reveal. Yeah, beautiful. Well, that's
You
very rich. Yeah.
you said from sculpture to movement to playing an instrument, and there's something about that process that we're continuously experiencing when we hear that seems so formative, that we're continuously building ourselves with what we hear from.
Mm,
So that just struck me, you know, that what we hear is formative, hearing
mm.
a Beethoven symphony versus the parking garage ticket machine. Anyway, that was just a thought.
And it's not just a thought, it's a very profound thought, and it'll bring me straight into the next part of where I want to go to. It's a little bit about this riddle, how Steiner says there's like this rhythmic, something with the rhythmic breathing that meets the hearing. The quote I ended with, yeah. Before I go further, do we feel complete here? Do you feel like you have time to digest, or is there any last comments?
I had a question. The little hairs in there, and you said that they either amplify or make it softer. Is that always in response to the volume that's coming in? Or like sometimes if you really want to hear something, does it already like
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Is it
Yeah.
a response or is it sometimes an initiation, an
So
initiative?
there's two answers to that. First of all, when we think hairs, we think way too big. These cells are so tiny that the movement they make is smaller than the size of a hydrogen atom. Well, hydrogen atom is the smallest atom that we have, so it's smaller. So it's actually not even visible movement. We're already in the other side. So that's the one thing I want to say. So they move, but where are they moving from? It's almost like you're already in the other world. And the second thing is, if you are very quiet, you can hear those high tones. That's actually the sound that they make. So they are doing that. So you can actually hear it. So they're always active. This active listening, yeah. But again, it's also the other world. Like in the yogic tradition, they call it nada, I think. It's like this sound that you can hear. It is these high pitches from the other world. So on one hand sense, you can say, like, as a materialist, yeah, these are just little hairs going blah, 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 and that makes a sound. But really, if you think blah, 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 that's actually so tiny movement. If you really think about it, you can't even measure it. So that's so tiny. You are just, again, threshold organ. So what are you actually hearing? And it comes not from the outside, it's only you can hear it. Yeah. Okay, let's take a deep breath. Here we go. Second part. Okay. So we went into this outer hearing of what we actually consider our sense organ, but there is also something what is called breathing hearing. And I put this image here that I have from actually, if you want to read more about this, read Armin Husemann's book on hearing and music. This image is from there. It's actually from Rembrandt. And again, there's so much here, touching the larynx, this whisper from the back. Yeah. So what is breathing hearing? Again, let's go to the animal world. There's a clue for that. Because that same kind of little reptile of amphibian that we just saw doesn't only hear by the movement of its legs or the air, it can also pick up even deeper, lower sounds, ground-borne sounds, through its torso. So it even bypasses the whole ear. And it goes directly to their cerebrospinal fluid. And they have more of it than we have. So that starts right away responding. This is this other kind of breathing, other kind of hearing that has to do with the cerebrospinal fluid being moved by sound. So this is, of course, a very different kind of animal than we are. And in human beings, it's a little bit different. That goes to breathing. So if you here look at the skull, sorry. Yeah, it's also a skull, in a skull, the brain of a human being and the spinal cord, you will see that in this really deep in the brain, there are these cavities, ventricles, where the cerebrospinal fluid is formed. And that fluid then just comes out to certain openings and then starts moving around the whole spinal cord all the way down and around the brain as well. Now let's look a little bit more into this production or this creation of this spinal fluid. So cerebrospinal fluid comes from the blood. So you could say it is blood without all the cells in there, but also minus a lot of proteins. So it's very clear, kind of pure blood. I don't really like that word, but like transparent, see-through, but it comes from blood. And you could say that where it's made in a network of the veins in the brain, there the etheric body is bound up in the blood, which is especially true in arterial blood, because that's where we're building up. So the eye, the astral, and the etheric are really in the blood. When it's produced, actually, when you are now in the cerebral spinal fluid and also in a lot of venous blood, it is as if you are crossing again a threshold, as if you are dead. What I mean with that is that a big part of your etheric forces are released in that area. So is the astral body and the eye, and this is if you crossed into the spiritual world. So here we are in a very different area. Here we have the possibility of consciousness. And if you will look at it, it has to do with the chemical ether / sound ether, that the chemical ether in the blood coming, especially in the liver, very active, kind of turns over into an elevated form of itself in the form of sound ether when it's released. And then the astral body, who lives more in the air, picks it up and kind of elevates it into light ether, into consciousness. So that's happening in these ventricles, which are deep down in the brain. Okay, how is it now all relating to breathing, hearing? Okay, here we go. So imagine for a moment that you're really you're maybe talking or listening to something that you find very interesting, and you're maybe moved inwardly. There's something moved in you, or it can be music, and you have a kind of a feeling. Can even be being in nature, you're listening, and there is this other part of you that starts to listen a little deeper. Do you know what I mean? This experience that you're really leaning in? Well, what happens is when you really start leaning in, your larynx starts to become kind of a sense organ and starts to move with either the words of the other or the music, dancing a little bit. You start breathing, like for instance, when someone is singing and you really are with it, with feeling, you start to breathe as if you are singing it. That makes sense. Or I don't know if you have experienced it. I have sometimes experienced when you have a real conversation with someone and it's so exciting. It's really like this, you're just catching something. You start to breathe in unison. Sometimes it happens in a classroom. I've been a teacher for a long time, and when it happens, it's like magic. The whole class starts to breathe. They're so with you, and they're so moved, and you really start to imitate, and you can feel it. So that is this breathing hearing. So because what happens is that the diaphragm, which becomes a little bit now like an eardrum, so you could say the larynx is almost like your outer ear, so it's kind of catching, like a sense organ. The diaphragm starts to kind of become like an eardrum through the breathing. And then when this is pushed down, when the diaphragm contracts, that fluid in there cannot really go anywhere. And it pushes the venous blood. So you could almost say, so now we don't have a limb here. So we're kind of in the inner ear space, but we don't have a limb here. We have the metabolic system. And this metabolic system starts to move the veins, especially the veins around the spinal cord, kind of pushes the blood in there because it cannot really go anywhere, which makes the spinal fluid rise up And then it has an effect in these ventricles in the brain. It kind of changes the circulation there as well. So where it was made. And then in these ventricles, ta-da, there are like similar little hair cells as we have in our inner ear. And they are moved by this stream, this wave. You could say now it's as if we are in the inner ear, but now in our body, where this chemical ether became sound ether, became light ether, I've just talked about. So now we have these hair cells being moved by this stream. And similarly, so here you can actually see it in the bottom. So here's a cross section. So here you see a vertebrae. In the middle is this black one is a spinal cord. Just around the spinal cord is the cerebrospinal fluid. And then around it is a whole network of veins, valveless veins that can, have the blood flow up and down. And those veins start kind of filling up, pushing. You can see that the yellow cerebrospinal fluid more narrow and brings it up. And then with the out breath, you already guess it, you have the opposite happening. Comes down, pressure releases, and also has effect in here. And this is kind of this breathing hearing. So there's kind of a second ear in you, your whole body, like we saw with this more reptile-like animals. They can also directly hear with their torso, without limbs, but through their metabolism. Isn't that kind of amazing? I mean, like through your belly. It's kind of belly hearing. Yeah. Okay, so hold those two thoughts, because Steiner says that they somehow meet. That when you experience music, that somehow meets this outer hearing and this inner hearing. Well, before I go there, I want to go back to speech again. Yeah. So we have this outer hearing and this inner hearing meeting. And that's somehow how we experience the wholeness. Actually, let's stay there for a moment. Experience the wholeness. In the inner ear, all the sounds are almost digested, taking apart. Like there's all these little waves. And yet I experience music, sound as a whole. This has to do with this breathing fluid that captures that wholeness. And I remember a couple of years ago, when I was still teaching, I have not a lot of time, but I have only 2 more slides, so I will speak a little faster. No, I will leave that story, forget about it. Here we go. So let's go now back to this speaking, those 3 sentences of speech. Do you remember, second year, third year, three sentences of Carl Koenig? So here he says, I speak the speech. He said, this is this kind of speaking that comes from the blood. It is as if here, this is the lung, kind of, if I cut myself open here, you see the heart, this is the back, here are the lungs. And there is this moment when the lungs, especially the outer part of the lungs, are like almost like little feet, little hands, sensing, touching the blood. And that is this saying. So I'm the saying thing. I speak the speech. I'm hungry. I'm cranky. You speak what lives in your blood, so to speak. Does that make sense? So this lung becomes kind of an ear. And you speak from there. That's one way of speaking directly from the blood. The other one, speech expresses itself in speaking, has to do more that if I want to know if this glass you're seeing here on this screen is made of plastic or glass or crystal, how would I know that? bing. You make it sound. It reveals right away more of its essence. So there is something with hearing that is connecting to more of an essence, is connecting more to the word of the thing itself. Does that make sense? So with hearing, we can go deeper. We kind of push through materialism, through the matter, to the thing itself. And it has a name, which might sound differently in different languages, but yet the name is not arbitrary. So speech expresses itself in speaking. Then we have this last way of speaking, which happens really in the 3rd year, so from 2nd to 3rd year and on, when you can start to have a real conversation. And that's what we were just looking at here. Again, is this ear, eardrum, middle ear, inner ear. And this inner ear is also connected to, on this side is the brain. So there is literally almost like a shaking hands of this cerebrospinal fluid, which is on this side, that you were do this breathing hearing with, and that. So when you speak, I thought, sorry, I had fun with this. I thought it's kind of like that. So this inner and outer. So when you speak from that, where do you speak from? Speech expresses me in speaking. Speech expresses me in speaking. In the beginning was the word. So there's a real, or how Goethe says, conversation is worth more than gold, or more precious than gold. There is something there when we really converse with one another and can really hear the true essence of the other, which is their I. If that makes sense. Okay, so I want to stop here with the last slide, and then I'm going to give it over. Started where we are ending. Before musicians allow their music to sound in the world, the cosmic being of music has taken hold of them, filling them with cosmic music and incorporating it into them. So where does the music come from? The tone spoke, we said in the beginning. Sounds already there. Okay. I'm handing it over to, I'm sorry, I took too much time, Maria, sorry.
No, it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating, Anouk. And I'm going to talk about a little boy that I knew, and I wish I would have heard all this before I met this little boy. But it was a long time ago, very close to the beginning of my career as a eurythmy therapist. And I met him in a daycare center where his mother asked me to come. And he was a boy who was microcephalic and blind. And so, well, then how am I doing eurythmy with a boy who's blind and microcephalic and didn't speak? And that was the interesting thing about the boy. He didn't speak. So I thought, well, how do we replace what is missing in the speech? And we did it through the eurythmy, if that makes sense. And so one of the things, with the consonants, of course, I wanted movement. So we do the L, we do the R. And then I thought, well, he's not getting light in the same way we do in our eyes. So I thought bringing the light in with the T. So I had this little song, had a little nut tree, nothing would it bear, but a silver nutmeg and a golden pear. The Queen of Stain's daughter came to visit me, all for the sake of my little nut tree. So he would sit on my lap and do that, right? And then he could stand and I could take his hands. And again, I have to say the music was very important because what he was able to hear, I wanted it to be musical and not any kind of dull speech. right? So I would try to keep it as musical, like the R would be the wheels of the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. And so we do the R like that. The L, lovely, lovely things for L, lilac, lavender as well, and more sweet than rhyming tells, lily of the valley, bells, to keep it moving like that. And then he could stand, he was very small, which also with children with micropcephalia, they're very small, right? And so he could stand and I could move his hands until eventually they would move on their own, right? Right? Doesn't make sense. Why what he didn't have in his speech, I was replacing with the eurythmy movement. And when you saw that about these limbs developing into the ear, it made so much sense. I wish I would have known all that, Anouk. But I was doing my best. For vowels, we'd cross with the A, brings the ego into the etheric, right? And don't do it all the time with regular kindergartens, but for him, it was really important. And then, of course, the ah. What happened with this boy, and what was so important to me in my learning as a beginning eurythmy therapist, was there were only 3 times that he had any speech at all. And it was echolalia, where he would repeat what he would hear in the environment or another person's speech. He would repeat it, but there were only 3 times that he could do that. And one was when he was swimming, another when he was on a trampoline, and the third was when he did eurythmy. And so my huge wake-up call, besides knowing that the child has to stand upright, the larynx has to drop, that has to be set up in this uprightness in order to speak, I realized that the child needs levity. And without the levity, something wasn't happening in him to allow him to speak. But by doing the eurythmy, even though it was echolalia, which was imitating right back what he'd just heard, I was really excited that he was able to free that out of himself. I only knew him for a short period of time, but I mean, when I think of Karl Koenig's work and the kind of work that you can be doing in eurythmy, if I would have known him for a long time, I could imagine it would have made a really big impression on his life. He made a big impression on me. And hearing you speak, Anouk, it makes so much sense. It makes me understand so much more deeply the inner workings of this child when there were these parts of him that couldn't completely flourish. And yet, with the movement of eurythmy, something in him could begin to release and grow and begin to flourish. So I just wanted to bring him because he didn't have the same capacities that the child has at that age with the speech. And yet I really felt the eurythmy was very, very, very important to, in a sense, fulfill what couldn't happen through his own physiology. So that's really all I needed to say, Anouk, but thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We had planned to end with the same exercises that we did at the very beginning. But I wonder if before we do that, if anybody has any further comments or questions. Okay, then. Maybe Anouk, you could spotlight both me and hold on.
Just
Be nice to do it twice. And the second time, if you feel like you know the sequence enough, turn your back to the computer so that the sound is coming from behind. So sorry.
Making a lot of noise in my on my computer.
Air, 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 air.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And thank you,
so
Nancy,
much.
for being here. I just have to say that, my dear friend, yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Really beautiful.
Lovely.